Baron Soka, TechFreedom. We're here today to talk about Title II. That's the section of the Communications Act of 1934 that covers telephone networks. Title II was applied to AT&T when it was a monopoly. In 1996, Congress updated the Communications Act and created two different sections. Title I is for information services. Title II is for common carrier services that are traditional telephony. The Clinton administration had to figure out what to put in what bucket, decided to put broadband decided not to put broadband into the Title II bucket, set in motion a series of decisions that eventually culminated in 2002 when the FCC, completing what the Clinton FCC had begun, the Michael Powell FCC decided to classify telephone broadband ISP service as a Title I lightly regulated information service. Made the same decision about cable in 2002 and then in telephones in 2005. Back in 2010, the FCC was trying to decide for the first time what basis it should use for issuing net neutrality rules. It floated very briefly the idea of using Title II for the Internet. That provoked reaction from the Hill. 74 House Democrats opposed Title II, just as Bill Kennard had done in the 1990s, just as senators like Ron Wyden and John Kerry had done in the 1990s, and the FCC decided not to invoke Title II. Here we are again today, having the same debate about Title II, and here we are today to explain the bipartisan, broad, philosophical opposition to Title II, people from across the political spectrum who can explain why they and their organizations have opposed Title II and what they see as the better path forward. So while we're waiting for Bob Crandall to join us, let me just introduce Hal Singer, is an economist who also worked in the Clinton administration, now works at the Progressive Policy Institute, and Dr. Nicole Turner-Lee of the Minority Media Telecommunications Council, who works on all of these issues as a sociologist. So Hal, if you could just explain why you're against Title II.
When economists come up against these problems like this, where you can't tell whether conduct is being motivated for pro-consumer or anti-consumer reasons, we usually decide to analyze them under what's called a case-by-case approach. We don't like to use blanket prohibitions, or what they call in the antitrust lingo, per se restrictions, unless we're confident that the conduct at issue could never be motivated for efficiency reasons. And I think that's the conversation that I want to force, which is, can we help our friends think through this a little clearer and come to recognize that when we're uncertain as to the motive, the best approach is to go down a case-by-case method.
You were just starting out by saying, I think, if you just re-summarize the very first part of what you said, that the question of whether to open up Title II was whether you wanted to ban all paid prioritization?
That's right, because the D.C. Circuit in the Verizon case seemed to suggest that if you wanted to effectively ban priority, which is what the original 2010 FCC order did, then that looks and feels a lot like common carriage. And so that's what's given an opening to the Title II proponents. They say, look, we want to ban priority. We think we must ban priority. It's evil in every manifestation. And the D.C. Circuit is telling us that looks and smells like common carriage. And that's why we're here.
Well, so let me just jump in here as the one lawyer that gets to talk to people who actually know something about economics today. What you just described is exactly how everybody has read that decision that's pushing for Title II. I think they've misread it because even under Title II, you can't ban paid prioritization. So what the court was really saying, and I think they put this very poorly, and they put it in such a way that has confused everyone. What they really said was that the FCC was trying to do something that went even beyond what you could do under Title II. So if you imagine a spectrum, there's 706 at one end, Title II in the middle, and then there's what the FCC was trying to do of essentially saying that no pay for priority would ever be allowed. So as far as I'm concerned, the number one reason that people are pushing for Title II is actually a misunderstanding of what Title II really means. So that's just I think that's pretty important to set the stage here as to what Title II would actually get you, which is not what people think, but it would get you a host of other problems. So Nicole, you've articulated your own concerns about Title II. You want to share them with us?
Yeah, and I want to pick up, and hello everybody, and thanks for doing this. I want to pick up first on Hal's comment about the exceptions of prioritization. I think are worthy to note, and telemedicine as well as public safety concerns being one of those. And I think that has not been discussed, so I'm glad that you brought it up. But I want to talk about Title II, to your comment, Baron, about the fact that there are these two continuums, right? And on the one side, there's a discussion about Title II as the overall protection to discrimination, as well as providing consumer protections, because common carrier regulation will allow for companies to have checks and balances to the growth of the internet and how people engage, etc. And from our perspective at the Minority Media and Telecom Council, we see Title II as something that is pretty dangerous when you look at the lack of ubiquity of access among consumers of color. So if you're still dealing with a 30 million adoption gap, and one of the goals that the FCC has actually espoused in other boxes of oxygen is around universal broadband adoption and deployment, putting in that type of regulation, in our opinion, has the potential to have consequences that in many ways stifle the type of adoption and investment and innovation that we want to see happen in vulnerable communities. And we liken it to the fact that, one, like I said just a moment ago, telephone service is not ubiquitous. So we're fooling ourselves by thinking that putting down a regulatory framework that is perceived to be applying to a universal service, much like telephone service was, is irresponsible policy. It's first, is how we think about it. The second thing is, when we think about, we agree at MMTC that there should not be discrimination, that all people should have access to the internet. That is in no way anything that MMTC or other civil rights groups or other groups that are geared towards consumers actually espouse, right? We want to see an open internet. We value the principles of an open internet. The same token, however, I was at a panel and I talked about my neighbor's garden and putting a fence around the type of experimentation that has been specifically very profitable for consumers, particularly consumers of color, who are now over-indexing and using these applications that are enabled by broadband in a very unique way, by laying down Title II regulation in managing hypothetical what-ifs and allowing it to be some type of solution that manages towards future harm is dangerous to our communities. And I talk about this all the time with people. Help me think about ways and give me evidence on how that regulatory framework will actually bridge the digital divide as we know it. And that's when we sort of stand on this debate.
So your concern, it sounds like, is exactly what Bill Kennard, FCC chairman in the late 90s, was concerned about, which is how do we promote deployment, and recognizing that Title II, which was designed for a monopoly network, was not going to encourage other companies to invest in the market.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, when you look at private sector investment, and again, this is in no way, as many people have said, just to be clear about our ideologue, it's not in any way massaging the interests of corporations, right? This is about, when I was at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, place matters when it came to broadband build-out. And if you're in communities where, investments are high because the perceived consumer demand is low, under a Title II regime, you can count on it that you will not see infrastructure build out and development the way that we see it now. So we're concerned, again, if you depress that pricing structure and you throw in, particularly for consumers that are on fixed income, the potential rate regulation that happens with Title II regulations, you are then placing people outside of the marketplace versus encouraging the type of digital inclusion that is for the people who actually support a Title II regulatory regime are espousing.
Well, so let me ask both of you. So the argument that has been made in response to what you've said is, sure, understood, Title II has problems, but we don't want all of Title II. Mm-hmm. And the argument's been, well, we'll just have a little bit of it. Is
mine working now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
You're back.
Okay. All right. Can I talk both to that point and perhaps about Title II?
Please.
Okay. I think what people don't understand is that Title II regulation under the old Bell monopoly was not any kind of a system that generated optimal allocation of resources. It was a mechanism by which political decisions were made to cross-subsidize one service at the expense of another. There's no reason to believe that going back to Title II regulation, it doesn't work that much today that way because we've essentially forborne from most retail regulation under Title II of voice telephony. But if we were to go back and use it for broadband, and particularly for interconnection, I mean, the worst examples of distorted rates involve the old interconnection regime with the Bell system, where we use very high interconnection rates on long-distance calls to cross-subsidize all kinds of services and to impede entry into telephony. I have no reason to believe that doing this for broadband would result in it would provide any different results.
So in other words, as an economist, you'd agree that Title II is designed for monopoly, and it really ensures that there will be one.
Well, it's designed for monopoly, but because you cannot regulate a telecommunications network, and particularly a modern telecommunications network, because you cannot allocate all the joint and fixed costs, it leaves the door wide open for political decision making, and it'll be used again to cross-subsidize all kinds of access to broadband, which are deemed politically desirable or socially desirable, but will not lead to innovation and the development of more broadband services for consumers.
So boil this down for me, Bob. What's the bottom line consequence for users then?
Well, the bottom line consequence for users would be they would be denied the fruits of innovation, because if an interconnection regime were to be developed under Title II, which say banned all payments to distributors, cable, telephone companies, or whatever, from content companies, then any attempt to change that regime would immediately be opposed by someone who was disadvantaged, and they would be put into a process that might last 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, and essentially it would be very difficult to change that regime because of the interveners who intervene for political reasons, not because for economic efficiency reasons.
Okay, well, let me try to distill where we are here. So Bob's talked about a number of different problems. He's talked about interconnection being regulated under Title II. So that's a related issue to net neutrality, but of course people who are pushing for Title II to be used for net neutrality will say that that's all they want it to be used for, that they just want just enough Title II to cover net neutrality, that they don't necessarily want to get into interconnection or to regulating other services. We're pretty skeptical of that working. So there are sort of two issues here. So the first is, how wide is the scope of Title II? Can you actually draw a line? And I would tend to agree with, say, Jeff Pulver, who's been arguing, having been through this back in 1995 to 2004. He's celebrating next week the 10th anniversary of the FCC order that said that VoIP was not a Title II service. And his response to this has been to say that there is no line that you can draw once you decide that some transmission services are going to be under Title II. His way of putting this is to say that the line exists only in the mind of whoever happens to be FCC chairman, and that if the FCC gets discretion on revising its interpretation of Title II now, they'll get discretion on revising that interpretation in the future, and that there's no clear line to draw except the one that Bill Kennard drew, that was drawn in traditional telecom law. So that's the first point, that you get beyond Title II for just broadband, it ends up applying to everything else. And then the second point, I think, is what Bob and others have mentioned, the idea that when people respond and say, oh, well, we understand that there are problems with Title II, but we know the FCC can just forbear from those by saying they're not going to apply those regulations, that's not so easy to do. And it's certainly not so easy to do in a permanent way. And we really put it to say it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Either the FCC can't effectively lower the bar, the very high bar that it's set for forbearance, and therefore it won't really be able to forbear at all, or as Larry Spiewak and George Ford have argued, they won't be able to do forbearance at all in the core market that they're defining here between a broadband company and an edge company, and therefore they'll end up having to set prices in that market, which ends up meaning tariffs and tolls and a sender pays regime, the very opposite of net neutrality. So either they can't forbear, and we get things that nobody who's pushing for net neutrality today wants, or they can forbear at least in some of those areas, but that forbearance becomes so easy that it's a slippery slope of anything else that anybody wants, and then you have endless political fights about both what's subject to Title II on the one hand and whether the FCC can forbear or not on the other hand. And I think what Hal and Nicole and Bob were all talking about is all of the problems that arise under Title II will inevitably arise once we reopen the door, because the FCC can't draw a clear line against applying to Title II to other services and can't promise just to apply just a little bit of Title II. So if that's what we're talking about, if it's that you can't be just a little bit pregnant, what would you say to the FCC today when it's considering Title II as an alternative justification for net neutrality? Hal and Nicole?
I would say, let's focus on the real threat and ask yourself, what can we do under Section 706? Can it address the real threat? And I think that there are things that we should be worried about. I think that we have to draw a line between vulnerability of content providers and the notion that they're so fragile. I use this phrase of my orchid theory, that they would wilt under just the mere idea that a priority arrangement was going on somewhere else on the internet. If you believe the former, if you think they're vulnerable and they need some protection, I think there's a lot that you could do under a case-by-case. I don't know if I can convince Bob of these things, but we could be on the lookout for things like exclusive arrangements in which an ISP would select, say, its preferred search provider or name their favorite app provider. And we could think about an ISP favoring its own content over others. We could think about an ISP throttling or threatening to degrade the speed of a content provider if it refuses to upgrade to the priority offering. All of these things could be rooted out or zapped, in the words of Tom Hazlett, under a case-by-case review in which a complaining party, the content provider, could come forward and explain that any of these things were happening to it. What you can't do under 706, at least according to the D.C. Circuit as I read, is you can't prevent the conversation from occurring. They want to, in their words, allow room for, quote, individualized bargaining under the Selco case. You have to at least allow these two parties to have a conversation. And if you just flat out ban priority from the get-go, you're out of the 706 bucket. Now, Baron, I didn't mean to suggest that Title II would fix it. I know that that's what they're arguing. But I want to fight this threshold question of, do we really need to ban all forms of priority? And there is a camp, and unfortunately it includes at least a handful of economists, who cannot conceive of a single priority deal that could be beneficial to all the parties to the transaction and not leave any other party.
Let me interrupt here for a second, Hal, because last week at the FCC roundtable, there have been two roundtables recently on this. At the economics roundtable, the FCC's chief economist talked about balance, but he only ever talked about the potential harms, and he said nothing at all about potential benefits. And then similarly, Marvin Amori at the FCC's Law and Net Neutrality Roundtable said something like, well, sometimes standards are helpful when we're not sure what the right answer is, and then we can figure it out as we go. But here on net neutrality, we absolutely know what the right answer is. So we don't need flexible standards because we're sure. So are we really so sure, or do we need to discover and experiment and then look for real problems?
Yeah, I don't think we know. People always ask me, what's the application going to look like that's going to take advantage of priority? And I respond back by saying, you've basically blown it out of the water by regulating it to death. So we never got to see the counterfactual. I don't know if in the last 4 years a market for priority would have developed in the absence of the 2010 rules. So it's hard to know which ones, but I can conceive of a real-time application. I always go back to telemedicine or something that just, or online gaming, something that can't tolerate even the slightest amount of jitter or latency. And to imagine a content provider coming forward and saying, best efforts isn't good enough for me. And my application would be so much more valuable if you gave it just a tad bit more priority. I'm willing to pay you to make it happen. The government should step into the middle of that transaction and say no. I mean, who is the loser to that transaction?
Right, and I want to pick up on that point too, around again what I said earlier about telemedicine, for example. So if you look at our communities of color where people suffer disproportionately from chronic disease, there are cases for prioritization. Let's say a healthcare provider wants to ensure that you get your blood pressure results or your results around a cardiac test before you go into cardiac arrest, right? Those kinds of priorities should take precedent, I think, over whether or not a gamer is getting their content to them quickly. But I want to digress just a minute, too, I think, on your question, Baron, around 706 versus Title II and where we stand. I mean, we believe 706 right now has encouraged the kind of robust dynamism that we're seeing, starting with with Chairman Bill Kennard. Where we do digress with some folks is on the enforcement on the consumer side. So we put forth a really strong leaning towards a Title VII, like the Equal Employment Opportunity process, where consumers will not be, find themselves without legal experience trying to debate bad actors in the ecosystem.
So let me just interrupt. So just to be clear, so we're talking about Title VII of a different act.
Yeah.
This is a framework for doing enforcement. So do you want to just explain briefly?
Yeah. I mean, I think for us, we think Title 706 is sufficient and provides the adequate resource for the FCC to act. Where we would think that there are areas, much like what we've been hearing from all sides of the debate, for more enforcement, to your point, is by looking at consumer protections. And one thing that we put forth in our comments is Title VII, which is adapting the model that's done in equal opportunity to give consumers much more proximity to this process versus having to hire lawyers to debate bad actors. And one neat thing and why we think 706 is actually adequate is the internet has come up with its own shaming culture, right? We saw that just recently with what happened with the Marriott Hotel, where people actually chime into the debate and they speak about the bad actors, and those folks that actually need to correct themselves on the side of business actually do so. So again, we think, in terms of what the court laid down, we really think that 706 could actually do the deal while still promoting the same type of innovation and investment that we're actually seeing now, which benefits our communities in the long run, because as Hal is mentioning, we don't know what the killer app is, in the next 5 to 6 years or next year, perchance, that will transform communities. And I think we have to be really careful about putting down regulations like a Title II framework in such a disruptive digital ecosystem that it limits the ability of people to experiment. And that's another thing with prioritization. Consumers somehow in this whole debate are being protected but not engaged, right? And there are some consumers that want to choose the type of content that they want delivered to them rather quickly. And I think that's something that's also missing in this debate in terms of the level of prioritization that happens at that level as well.
Well, Hal, you, after the economics roundtable, you've suggested that the way out here would be focusing at a minimum on allowing user-directed prioritization, something that's clearly beneficial. Anything else to say about that?
Yeah, now when you start to go with user-directed, what's important is that the leading proponent, the intellectual heir to Tim Wu, Barbara Van Schuick at Stanford, has now said that user-directed prioritization is palatable to her, so long as, and this is key, that the user picks up 100% of the tab. Now, as economists, that's offensive. We know right away that doesn't make sense. Why would you ever put the tab to the party, to the transaction in a two-sided market that's more price-sensitive?
Right.
We understand where she's coming from. We know whose interests she's really protecting. But to me, it's an amazing admission, because as soon as you say user-directed, user pick up the tab is okay, it's an acknowledgement, right, that some priority arrangements could be beneficial to consumers. And as soon as you get into that bucket, some could be beneficial, you're out of the per se camp. You're out of the blanket prohibition. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah. Well, the problem with this is, how do we know that the user is only just picking up the tab? Presumably, if there's prioritization, it costs somebody something to provide this prioritization. The user presumably will pay for it at some fixed price a month, some fixed price per click, some fixed price for something. But how do we know that that in fact the price there is correct, the correct one, that just exactly offsets the additional cost of the prioritization? I mean, that's what Title II is all about, trying to figure out whether prices reflect costs, and there's no way in which a regulator can do that in a network industry like telecommunications.
So let me try to wrap up where we are here so far. So we've talked about the overall effects on investment. I should mention Christopher Yu has a great study out comparing investment levels in the United States and in European countries that have Title II-like regimes, and has found that they have something like half as much investment, significantly lower levels of fiber deployment. And in many of those countries, for a variety of reasons, but also because of Title II-style rules, they really only have one pipe to the home. They don't have the competition that we have in the United States. People complain here about not having enough competitive choices, but the difference between 1 and 2 is infinite. In 2, you actually have someone to switch to. You have competition in the marketplace, and we're seeing that happen, especially in markets where Verizon Fios has deployed. They're forcing cable companies to offer significantly larger speed packages. So that's one concern. We talked about the concern about not banning applications, paid priority services that might actually be beneficial. Jeff Manny and I have written about this, and our example is a hypothetical holographic projection startup called iHolo that would really need prioritization to make its technology work, and that might actually be able to get help getting off the ground by getting funding that might not be available to it otherwise. But I want to mention another dimension to this debate, which is the term prioritization has been used to cover a lot, and technically it means what we've been talking about. It means making sure that high priority packets get through sooner, but it's also been conflated with sponsored data plans, and those are ways that allow, for example, Metro PCS back in 2011 was trying to increase adoption among poor users who weren't using the internet, and they were especially targeting minorities in cities to get them online with a cheap package that included free access to unlimited YouTube. And they were demonized for that, and they gave up on that plan because it was alleged to be a net neutrality violation. Even though that kind of thing can help to promote deployment in the United States, we're now having this debate about zero rating plans in the rest of the world where it's Facebook and Google and Twitter and even Wikipedia that are being demonized for doing something non-neutral. So, Nicole, do you want to talk about the benefits of those kinds of sponsored data or zero rating programs and encouraging adoption?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and you've heard me talk about this, I think, when you're looking at low-income consumers that, where there have been upward trajectories of adoption on wireless services, for example, or other forms of digital technologies, there are still concerns about cost, which always tickles me with regards to the pushback against these sponsored data plans by those that support Title II, because what you're seeing are creative strategies to actually bring more people in for more universal broadband adoption. I mean, we actually at MMTC looked at, for example, the T-Mobile Music Freedom Program, whereas that was called out as a net neutrality violation. I mean, for us at first it was like there are not enough stations of color that are represented in the choices against the data caps. But at the end of the day, what we also think is important about it is if you're trying to distinguish and get more people online, you have to be creative in the arrangements that are made to ensure that they actually do participate. So in the case of the T-Mobile plan, we saw it not as a net neutrality violation, but because T-Mobile's customers are predominantly Black, predominantly Latino, predominantly low income, this gave them the opportunity to see more values of the internet outside of just regular telephone service, and allows them to engage in an ecosystem which is driving up the value of broadband as we know it today. So I think it's been a dirty word when we say sponsored data plans, but again, it's better than actually looking at cost shifting, where we're seeing low-income consumers pick up the tab for folks that are what I consider to be more digitally savvy and digital elite when they actually get online. And so we have to figure out, and Baron, we were in a conversation where somebody said at one point, well, giving people Facebook is not enough. Well, that helps that person to get online. When I was working in One Economy, people used to tell us giving a person a PC at that time versus a laptop wasn't enough. But I can tell you what, we got a lot of people online by giving that PC, and once they had the PC, they were able to go to the laptop, and now we're seeing people of color over-index on smart pads and smartphones and other things. So I think it's looking at what I consider to be an uncooked, not fully baked internet ecosystem, and us having this dialogue, which I think started with net neutrality, progressed to open internet, and now has a whole slew of aspirations over what common carrier regulation can actually do to manage the entire ecosystem without looking at the fact that we do not have ubiquitous deployment and ubiquitous adoption. So I think we're really going down a slippery slope by demonizing some of these terms that in essence will get those 30 million people that still remain on the fringe of this ecosystem online.
Hal?
I just want to say it's not enough for us to explain the pitfalls and the harms of Title II. To me, they're apparent. I think that we also have to be able to articulate a path to the finish line that gets us past the D.C. Circuit. And the D.C. Circuit, I think, made it clear. It's not crystal clear. you do have to parse some language, but the notion, what I think offended them the most was what I would call a presumption that even though the FCC said they were gonna give case by case a chance, they created a strong presumption that all priority deals would be in violation of the non-discrimination standard. The language that they used was it would I don't know if I'll pull it up, but it was likely to be or raise significant cause for concern, right? So that created the presumption that these things are bad. But what I have been peddling is the idea that we should reverse the presumption. The presumption should be that the deals are efficient, and that the burden should be on the complaining party, namely the content provider, to come forward and prove otherwise. I want to point out that, number one, this would permit this kind of individualized bargaining that the D.C. Circuit called for under 706. But two, and perhaps more important, is that it would put the FCC's treatment of discrimination claims on the Internet in concert with the way that the FCC treats discrimination complaints in the video space.
That's right.
I mean, to me, what's mind-boggling is that we're talking here about the same pipes,
yes,
the same actors, and sometimes the same services, video, and we're gonna treat them under case by case, where the complaining party, the content provider, has the burden to prove that somehow the carriage was discriminatory, right? But yet, when we go to the Internet, we're gonna have a hard and fast blanket rule that says no deals to be done.
right.
Right? I mean, it seems like discrimination is discrimination. It's all emanating from the same place.
Right.
You know, why would we have two different regimes to take these on?
Well, Hal, you spend a lot of your time fighting against cable companies on those video deals, so it's not like you're great friends or fans of theirs, and I take you to be quite sincere in saying that. Let me take some questions here from the audience who has been patient enough to wait through our technical problems. Mike Horney asks, how would Title II and embracing that affect government handouts and regulatory capture? So what opportunity is there here for what economists call rent-seeking, getting something for free? Bob, this has been an area that you've worked on a lot. You've had a lot of perspective on this. What dangers do you see here for powerful people with loud voices capturing the agency?
It doesn't necessarily have to be powerful people. It can be an assembly of people who are politically powerful, like rural telephone companies. Why do we still have a $6-7 billion a year universal service program, which hasn't worked at all to increase subscriptions? And the reason is because there are hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of small rural telephone companies. These are not big, powerful companies, but they have substantial political clout. Why are we spending 8-10 years reviewing special access rules? Because the people who are opposed to the telephone companies and special access rules have some political clout, and this will stretch on forever. It's bound to be rent-seeking if you go to Title II regulation.
Well, I would take that caution and amend what I said to point out, for example, that the reason we use high fructose corn syrup in this country is because we have huge tariffs about sugar and subsidies for beet farmers in North Dakota. And it's not because they are huge, but rather because they care so much about this that they're willing to go to fight for it, and they can capture government policy and make everybody else pay. I think that's the kind of public choice story that you're describing, Bob, where people...
Or the ethanol mandate for gasoline, yeah.
I just want to point out, this is an argument, I guess, against the interest that I'm peddling here, but if you start with a rate of 0, which is what they would compel through this regulation, it's hard
for priority.
For priority, right? It's hard to do better than that. I mean, compare that to the way that the CLECs began their morass, which was started cost-based rates, and then there was a bunch of lobbying to get the rates lower and lower and lower. But here it seems they'd be starting at 0, so I don't know how you do better than 0 with more intense lobbying. Maybe a negative rate for priority. Who knows?
And on the government side, I think the fear of utility-based framework for something as dynamic and changing as broadband, it's almost like a moot point, right? Because since DSL, we've seen the prices decline. I was sharing with somebody when I was in Chicago and DSL first came out. It was $150 a month to have a DSL service. Now you're actually seeing, broadband packaged in a way that makes it more affordable. But the challenge of government stepping in and, again, interceding on behalf of what we're seeing, which is always changing, again, who's to say what broadband looks like today is what it's going to look like tomorrow? And I think it's just a moot point of continuously fighting this argument of putting a utility-based framework. And, again, I go back to our constituents, people of color. government is great, but there's still roads and sewage systems and water systems that have to be updated. And I really don't think that broadband is one of those systems that we want to see under that regulation.
Well, so let's talk about this, because I think there's a sort of way to bridge those two ideas. So on the one hand, I mean, I agree with everything you just said, but I think there is a certain role for government here, and that's building the true infrastructure. So for example, San Francisco is right now starting a 10-year project to upgrade all of its sewers. They're digging up every street in the city to replace the sewer line. And what they should be doing is, every time they do that, they could install a conduit that any broadband company could use to deploy fiber. Google Fiber would clearly do that. They wanted to go to San Francisco, and they decided not to because San Francisco's made deployment so hard. There are small companies like Sonic.net out in the Bay Area that would rent those conduits. That could lower the cost of deployment significantly. It's about 90% cheaper to install that part of the network if there's a conduit to do it in. So that's a good use for taxpayer money. That's an infrastructure project that, if cities did that in particular, you could really see deployment become a lot cheaper. But that doesn't mean that the government has to own or run the broadband network. And it doesn't have anything to do with the regulatory status. In fact, the companies that are deploying, like Google Fiber, when they've deployed, they've chosen not to offer voice service because that would subject them to Title II. So you're already seeing the marketplace talk today where companies that are trying to serve those unserved constituents are trying to avoid Title II because of all of the regulatory mess that comes with it. So let me just ask all of you as we wrap up here. So what do you think a compromise might look like here? Do you think there's a path forward on this that moves us beyond this debate? And I'll just throw out that how you and others have articulated better ways to write net neutrality rules. And I'd like to see the FCC use Section 706 instead of Title II. But I have to say, we've also expressed our concerns that 706, as the FCC has interpreted it, is a blank check for the FCC to regulate not just broadband, but the entire internet. And they're already talking about using that for privacy and security. So for that reason alone, as well as my concerns about what Congress really meant with 706, I think the obvious answer, the best answer, even if it's not an easy answer, is legislation. And that's something that could actually happen in less time than it would take for the FCC to work through this. So let me just ask all of you, suppose that we have an opportunity for a legislative deal and that there's a compromise on net neutrality that does deal with real concerns, but tries to make sure that we don't over-regulate and ban things that might help consumers, whether that's an app that we haven't experienced yet, or zero rating plans or sponsored data plans that help to promote service people that otherwise wouldn't get it, while making sure that we're encouraging more than one company, more than two companies, to deploy to broadband. Suppose that were paired with legislation that said no Title II for the internet, and also we're going to narrow 706. But on the other hand, did the things that many people have proposed. Some Democrats like Ann Eshoo have proposed smart infrastructure policies like those dig once conduits. There are some states that are investing in poles to upgrade them to make them capable of carrying fiber. And then Google Fiber and others have identified many of the red tape barriers that cities put up to deployment. Suppose we bundle all that together in a 4-part package that would promote competition, deal with net neutrality concerns, but finally solve this debate about the FCC's legal authority by giving them clear authority, but taking away the blank check they have under 706 and barring Title II. What would you think of a compromise like that, or what would you want to see in a deal? Nicole?
Well, I mean, I think, there's been conversations about hybrid models between what do you take from each and kind of pull them together. I think that is also a legal nightmare trying to piece that together, honestly. I think you're correct, and I do want to err on the side of supporting you in terms of some legislative proposals that, if done correctly and seamlessly, and in concert with what this conversation is, we could actually see more movement, and probably parts of this discussion would be handled elsewhere. I do also think that, at some point with the modernization of the Telecom Act, that many of these things that we're debating now have the potential to be solved or, again, debated now. When we go into that legislative proposal, which I think will be the undergird for all of the conversation that we're having in terms of what that looks like. There may not be the titles as they exist today if that act is updated. So I think that our oxygen really should be placed in that bucket as well. So I think we're moving in the right way. I mean, our concern, honestly, with any type of model, which is why we err on the side of 706 with strong consumer protection, in all honesty, is because when you start to look at projects, you know, like you said with Google Fiber, you still also risk, you know, this whole conversation about redlining, which 706 does give the authority to the FCC to monitor very carefully so that we don't have incongruent growth and deployment in neighborhoods where there are, you know, some services over others or some neighborhoods are selected over others. So we have to be careful about that. I mean, again, I think 706 provides some blanket authority to actually mitigate through some of those circumstances, which I think are important to the minority community.
So, but would you agree that it would be better to figure out what our concerns are like that and to actually deal with them rather than just giving the FCC a blank check to just do whatever decided it might be good for deployment?
Oh, no, I totally agree. I mean, I think that there are lots of other issues, and the chairman actually mentioned this in the last roundtable that the FCC could be dealing with and could be figuring out positive solution to, and this is just one piece of that entire pie of problems and scenarios that need to be addressed. So I certainly agree with that. I think I think if I hear you correctly, Baron, is starting out with the aspirations of what we're actually trying to solve and working from those aspirations down to real policies that are not divisive and can continue the type of growth that we're seeing now. I think all of us, you know, and we may be sounding like a choir in concert to this Title II piece, but all of us are basically saying, I think at some point, and Hal says it very well in the pieces that he's written, let's just be very cautious for how we move forward with this, because it's not going to be a scenario that we can turn back from.
Right.
And the implications down the road can in some way stifle and deter what we're actually seeing in the short period of time that has actually, you know, birthed the internet in the way that we know it today.
Okay, so final words here. Let me go to Bob, and then we'll wrap up with Hal. Bob?
Well, to address your last question, I see no reason why the politics of legislating a new act would be any different from the politics we're seeing here at the Commission over net neutrality. Go back to 1996, the only reason we got some sort of a solution there was that there were two sides, the long-distance companies and the local companies. Each could gain something from legislation, and they compromised. It had nothing to do with the body politic at large. You couldn't possibly understand what was going on. And the same thing would be true here. If there are entities that are willing to spend as much capital, as much rhetoric on the net neutrality issue before the Commission, they surely will spend it at the Congress. And I don't think, Baron, you'll get the legislation you would like to get, because I think there will be some language which bars paid prioritization and things like that.
Hal?
Yeah, I think that in a perfect world, this would emanate from Congress. Congress would limit the authority and give a crystal clear direction. But if I lay out the non-discrimination rules from cable emanating from the 92 Act, 93 and 94 orders by the FCC implementing that act kind of laid it out. But the hard decisions to me, and what kind of gets me excited, are who's got the burden, what are the evidentiary standards, and I don't know if we're going to look to Congress to lay out those details.
Okay, well, I'll just wrap up for my part by saying I think that, that there is a way to deal with that very issue. How I think were involved in the Digital Age Communications Act project that PFF ran back in 2004, 2005, and that was an effort to bring together people from across the political spectrum to craft smart rules. And that there is a way to do that that gives the FCC standards and gives it clear rulemaking authority, but also requires it to work on a case-by-case basis where it can. And to Bob, to your point, I certainly agree with you about the politics of a larger rewrite. I think that something like this could be a narrow package that could fit into a larger rewrite if that were to happen, but it could also be done separately. And I think the opportunity here is there is actually a policy consensus among a lot of people, such as the people we have here today. It's just that there's no legal consensus about the FCC's authority, and so the right way to solve that problem is to go to Congress and get clear legislative authority to deal with real concerns in a narrow and tailored way. So having said that, thanks for joining us today. I'm sure we'll take any follow-up questions on Twitter if anybody wants to engage us. Hal and Nicole and I are all avid Twitter users. Maybe we can get Bob to join us.
Come on, Bob.
Probably not. Thanks a lot.
But thanks so much for coming. I'll just refer you to MMTC and TechFreedom both filed comments on Title II. We have those up on the blog post about this. Hal's been writing about this aggressively, and we'll put some of his.
PPI's website as well.
And we'll put the PPI comments up as well, and whatever Bob wants to send us. So thanks very much for joining us today. We'll be better about the tech production side of this next time. Thanks.
Nicole, Hal.
Right.